Crop diversity and climate resilience building food security in a changing climate. Agriculture is entering a period of unprecedented change. Around the world, farmers are facing rising temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns, more frequent droughts, floods, storms, and the growing spread of pests and diseases. These environmental changes are affecting agricultural productivity and creating new risks for food systems that support billions of people. Crop diversity and climate resilience building food security in a At the same time, global food security remains under pressure. Hundreds of millions of people continue to experience hunger, while billions more face varying degrees of food insecurity. As populations grow and climate conditions become increasingly unpredictable, ensuring a stable and reliable food supply has become one of the defining challenges of the 21st century. Modern agriculture depends heavily on a relatively small number of crops. Rice, wheat, and maize provide a large share of the calories consumed worldwide. While these crops have helped feed a growing global population, dependence on a limited number of species also creates vulnerability. When environmental conditions change or new biological threats emerge, entire production systems can be placed at risk. One of nature's most powerful responses to uncertainty is diversity. Throughout history, farmers and communities have cultivated thousands of crop species and countless varieties adapted to different climates, soils, cultures, and growing conditions. This diversity represents a vast reservoir of genetic resources that can help agriculture adapt to changing environments. Crop diversity includes the variety of crop species we cultivate. The diversity found within each crop species, traditional farmer-developed landraces, and the wild relatives from which many crops originated. Together, these forms of diversity provide the biological foundation for resilience, adaptation, and long-term food security. In this module, we will explore how crop diversity strengthens agricultural systems, reduces vulnerability to climate-related shocks, supports stable food production, and contributes to resilient food systems capable of meeting future challenges. We will examine the scientific evidence, the role of genetic diversity, the importance of conservation, and the practical strategies being used around the world to build climate-resilient agriculture. Understanding crop diversity is not simply about understanding plants. It is about understanding how biodiversity, agriculture, climate adaptation, food security, and human well-being are interconnected within a complex and rapidly changing world. We will examine diversity at multiple levels, including diversity among crop species, diversity within crop species, traditional farmer-developed varieties known as landraces, and the wild relatives that contribute valuable genetic traits to modern agriculture. You will also learn how climate change affects agricultural systems. Rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, extreme weather events, and expanding pest and disease pressures are transforming growing conditions around the world. Understanding these pressures is essential for understanding why resilient agricultural systems are becoming increasingly important. A central theme of this module is the relationship between diversity and resilience. We will explore how biological diversity helps agricultural systems absorb shocks, adapt to changing conditions, and continue functioning even when individual crops or varieties face environmental stress. You will also examine how crop diversity contributes to food security. Diverse agricultural systems can help stabilize production, reduce risk, improve nutrition, and support the livelihoods of farming communities. In a world facing increasing uncertainty, diversity acts as a form of biological insurance that helps safeguard food supplies. Another important objective is understanding the conservation of genetic resources. We will explore why protecting crop varieties, traditional land races, seed collections, and wild relatives is essential for future agricultural adaptation. These resources provide the raw genetic material needed to develop crops capable of thriving under changing climatic conditions. Finally, we will apply systems thinking to agriculture and climate adaptation. Rather than viewing crops, farmers, ecosystems, and food systems as separate components, we will examine how they interact within a larger system. This perspective helps reveal how decisions made today can influence resilience, sustainability, and food security for future generations. As we move through the module, keep these learning objectives in mind. Together, they provide a framework for understanding how crop diversity supports resilient agriculture and why it is increasingly recognized as a critical component of climate adaptation strategies worldwide. Before we begin exploring the science of crop diversity and climate resilience, it is useful to understand what this module aims to accomplish. Climate change is creating complex challenges for agriculture, food systems, and rural livelihoods. Addressing these challenges requires more than simply understanding individual crops or farming practices. It requires an appreciation of how biological diversity contributes to adaptation, resilience, and long-term sustainability. By the end of this module, you will be able to explain what crop diversity is and why it matters. Crop diversity is one of the most important yet often overlooked foundations of global food security. For thousands of years, farmers have cultivated a wide range of crops and crop varieties adapted to different climates, soils, landscapes, and cultural traditions. This diversity has enabled agriculture to thrive across an extraordinary range of environmental conditions and has provided humanity with the biological resources needed to adapt to change. Today, however, agriculture faces growing challenges. Climate change is increasing temperatures, altering rainfall patterns, intensifying droughts and floods, and expanding the range of pests and diseases. These changes are creating new risks for agricultural production at a time when global demand for food continues to rise. Modern food systems also depend heavily on a relatively small number of crops. Rice, wheat, and maize provide a significant share of the world's food supply. While these crops are essential to global nutrition, dependence on a limited number of species and varieties can increase vulnerability when environmental conditions become unstable. Crop diversity helps reduce this vulnerability. Agricultural systems that contain a wider range of crops and crop varieties are generally more resilient to climatic shocks. Different crops respond differently to environmental stress. When drought, heat, flooding, or disease affects one crop, others may continue to perform well, helping to stabilize production and reduce overall risk. The benefits of crop diversity extend beyond production stability. Diverse agricultural systems often support healthier soils, more effective pest management, greater biodiversity, improved resource efficiency, and more nutritious diets. These benefits strengthen both ecological and social resilience. At the genetic level, diversity provides the raw material for adaptation. Traits such as drought tolerance, heat tolerance, salinity tolerance, flood resistance, and disease resistance are often found within traditional crop varieties and wild relatives. Plant breeders depend upon these genetic resources to develop improved varieties capable of thriving under changing environmental conditions. The conservation of crop diversity has therefore become a global priority. Seed banks, gene banks, botanical collections, research institutions, farming communities, and international organizations are working together to preserve and utilize genetic resources before they are lost through genetic erosion. Protecting this diversity helps ensure that future generations will have access to the biological tools needed to respond to emerging challenges. Research from around the world increasingly demonstrates that crop diversification can strengthen agricultural resilience. Diverse farming systems often experience lower production variability, improved recovery following environmental shocks, and greater capacity to adapt to uncertain future conditions. While crop diversity is not a complete solution to climate change, it represents an important component of broader adaptation and food security strategies. This module explores how crop diversity contributes to climate resilience, examines the scientific evidence supporting diversification, and highlights the role of genetic resources in building sustainable food systems. The central message is straightforward but powerful. Diversity increases options, and in a world characterized by uncertainty, options create resilience. As climate change accelerates and agricultural systems face mounting pressures, preserving and utilizing crop diversity may prove to be one of humanity's most valuable investments in food security, sustainability, and long-term well-being. To understand how agriculture can adapt to climate change, we must first understand the concept of crop diversity. At its simplest level, crop diversity refers to the variety of plants that humans cultivate for food, fiber, fodder, fuel, medicine, and other purposes. However, crop diversity is much more than simply growing many different crops. It encompasses diversity at multiple biological levels, each of which contributes to agricultural resilience and food security. The first level is diversity among crop species. Around the world, farmers cultivate a wide range of crops, including cereals such as rice, wheat, and maize, legumes such as beans, peas, and lentils, root and tuber crops such as potatoes and cassava, fruits, vegetables, oilseeds, spices, and numerous other plant species. Each species possesses unique characteristics, environmental requirements, and responses to stress. The second level is diversity within a crop species. Consider rice as an example. Although we often refer to rice as a single crop, thousands of distinct rice varieties exist around the world. Some varieties perform well under drought conditions, while others are adapted to flooding. Some tolerate heat, while others are resistant to specific pests or diseases. Similar diversity exists within wheat, maize, potatoes, and many other crops. A third component of crop diversity consists of traditional land races. Land races are locally adapted crop varieties that have been developed over generations by farmers through seed selection and cultivation under specific environmental conditions. These varieties often possess unique traits that enable them to thrive in challenging environments where modern commercial varieties may struggle. A fourth and often overlooked component is crop wild relatives. These are the wild ancestors and related species from which many cultivated crops evolved. Although they may not be grown commercially, they frequently contain valuable genetic traits such as drought tolerance, heat resistance, salinity tolerance, and disease resistance. Plant breeders often rely on these wild relatives when developing improved crop varieties. Together, these different forms of diversity create an enormous reservoir of genetic resources. This genetic diversity represents nature's library of adaptive solutions accumulated through thousands of years of evolution and human selection. Crop diversity did not arise by accident. It is the result of a long partnership between human societies and natural ecosystems. For thousands of years, farmers selected seeds from plants that performed well under local conditions. Over time, this process generated an extraordinary range of crop varieties adapted to different climates, soils, elevations, rainfall patterns, and cultural preferences. Historically, agricultural systems were often highly diverse. Farmers frequently cultivated multiple crops and maintained numerous varieties within the same farming system. This diversity provided protection against unpredictable weather, pests, diseases, and crop failures. In recent decades, however, many agricultural systems have become more specialized. Advances in breeding, mechanization, irrigation, and global markets have increased productivity, but have also encouraged greater reliance on a smaller number of crops and varieties. While this approach has delivered significant gains in food production, it has also contributed to concerns about the loss of crop diversity, sometimes referred to as genetic erosion. Scientists increasingly recognize that crop diversity is far more than a biological curiosity. It is a strategic resource for agriculture. Diversity provides options. It allows farmers, researchers, and plant breeders to respond to changing environmental conditions, emerging diseases, evolving pests, and shifting market demands. The importance of crop diversity becomes especially apparent during periods of uncertainty. When environmental conditions change, not all crops or varieties respond in the same way. Some may fail, while others continue to perform. This variation creates flexibility and resilience within agricultural systems. A useful way to think about crop diversity is to imagine an investment portfolio. Investors often spread their investments across different assets to reduce risk. Similarly, agricultural diversity spreads biological risk across multiple crops and varieties. If one crop experiences difficulties, others may help sustain production and livelihoods. This concept of diversity as a form of biological insurance lies at the heart of climate adaptation. As weather patterns become less predictable and environmental stresses increase, maintaining a broad range of genetic resources becomes increasingly important. Understanding what crop diversity is provides the foundation for our next discussion. Why diversity matters and how it helps agricultural systems withstand climate-related shocks and uncertainties. Crop diversity is an important part of a much larger concept known as agricultural diversity or agrobiodiversity. To fully appreciate the role of crop diversity in climate resilience, it is helpful to understand how it fits within the broader agricultural system. Agricultural diversity refers to the variety of life forms, genetic resources, ecological relationships, and management practices that support food production. It includes not only crops but also livestock, pollinators, soil organisms, natural enemies of pests, trees, aquatic resources, and the ecosystems that sustain them. In other words, agricultural systems are not simply collections of individual crops. They are living ecosystems composed of countless interacting organisms and processes. The productivity and resilience of agriculture depend on the health and diversity of these relationships. At the foundation of agricultural diversity lies genetic diversity. Genetic diversity exists within crop varieties, livestock breeds, and other organisms that contribute to food production. This diversity provides the raw material for adaptation and evolution. Without genetic diversity, agricultural systems would have limited capacity to respond to changing environmental conditions. The next level is species diversity. Agricultural landscapes may contain multiple crop species, livestock species, pollinator species, soil organisms, birds, insects, and microorganisms. Each species performs different functions that contribute to the overall health and productivity of the system. For example, legumes help fix nitrogen in soils. Pollinators enable the reproduction of many crops and wild plants. Earthworms improve soil structure and nutrient cycling. Predatory insects help control pest populations. Together, these organisms provide ecosystem services that support agricultural production. Agricultural diversity also includes ecosystem diversity. Farms are often embedded within larger landscapes that contain forests, grasslands, wetlands, rivers, hedgerows, and other natural habitats. These surrounding ecosystems influence water availability, pollination, pest control, soil conservation, and climate regulation. The interactions among these different forms of diversity create resilience. A diverse agricultural system often possesses multiple pathways for maintaining productivity when environmental conditions change. If one component is affected by drought, disease, or other disturbances, other components may continue to function and help stabilize the system. This concept is sometimes referred to as ecological redundancy. Multiple species may perform similar ecological functions. If one species declines, others may partially compensate, reducing the risk of system failure. Research suggests that such redundancy can strengthen resilience and improve the capacity of agricultural systems to recover from shocks. Agricultural diversity can also be viewed across different spatial scales. Diversity may exist within a field through mixed cropping systems. It may exist at the farm level through crop rotations and integrated farming systems. It may exist across landscapes through a mosaic of different crops, habitats, and land uses. Each scale contributes to overall resilience in different ways. Historically, many traditional farming systems were highly diverse. Farmers often cultivated multiple crops, raised livestock, maintained trees, and relied upon local ecological knowledge to manage complex agricultural landscapes. These systems evolved over centuries and frequently displayed remarkable adaptability to environmental variability. In contrast, modern industrial agriculture has often emphasized specialization and uniformity. Large areas may be devoted to a single crop variety, managed using standardized practices designed to maximize productivity and efficiency. While these systems can achieve impressive yields under favorable conditions, they may also become more vulnerable to environmental shocks when diversity is reduced. The challenge for modern agriculture is therefore not a choice between productivity and diversity. Increasingly, researchers are recognizing that diversity itself can contribute to productivity, stability, and long-term sustainability. Diverse systems often make more efficient use of resources, support beneficial ecological interactions, and reduce dependence on external inputs. This broader perspective helps us understand why crop diversity is so important. Crop diversity is not an isolated concept. It forms part of a larger network of biological relationships that support agricultural resilience. Protecting and enhancing diversity at multiple levels can strengthen the ability of food systems to adapt to climate change and other future challenges. As we move forward, we will examine one of the most important contributions of agricultural diversity, its role as nature's adaptation mechanism. Through genetic diversity, agricultural systems acquire the capacity to evolve, adapt, and respond to environmental change. Now that we understand what crop diversity is and how it fits within the broader concept of agricultural diversity, an important question remains: why does crop diversity matter? The answer lies in one simple reality. Agriculture operates in an environment characterized by uncertainty. Weather conditions change from year to year. Pest populations evolve. Diseases emerge and spread. Markets fluctuate. Water availability varies. Climate conditions shift over time. Farmers must continually adapt to these changing circumstances. In such an environment, diversity provides options. When agricultural systems depend heavily on a single crop or a small number of genetically similar varieties, they become more vulnerable to unexpected disruptions. If a disease emerges that affects the dominant variety, losses can be severe. If temperatures rise beyond the tolerance range of a particular crop, yields may decline significantly. If rainfall patterns change, crops adapted to previous conditions may struggle to survive. Diversity helps reduce these risks by spreading vulnerability across multiple crops and varieties. Different crops possess different strengths, weaknesses, and environmental requirements. Some perform better under drought conditions, others tolerate flooding, some resist pests or diseases, others thrive in poor soils or under temperature extremes. Because these responses vary, agricultural systems containing multiple crops and varieties are often better able to maintain production under changing conditions. When one crop experiences difficulties, another may continue to perform well. This reduces the likelihood of catastrophic losses and contributes to greater production stability. Scientists often describe this as a risk management strategy. Just as investors diversify financial portfolios to reduce exposure to uncertainty, farmers can diversify biological resources to reduce agricultural risk. Diversity serves as a form of biological insurance against environmental variability. Research increasingly supports this concept. Studies have shown that agricultural systems with higher levels of crop diversity tend to be more resilient to climatic variability. Diverse systems often experience lower year-to-year fluctuations in production and may recover more effectively following environmental shocks. In regions exposed to increasing climate variability, crop diversity can help buffer the negative impacts of droughts, temperature extremes, and other climate-related stresses. Crop diversity also contributes to food security. Food security is not simply about producing large quantities of food. It is about ensuring stable and reliable access to food over time. Agricultural systems that can continue functioning under adverse conditions help support more secure food supplies for communities and nations. The benefits extend beyond yield stability. Different crops contribute different nutrients to human diets. A food system based on a narrow range of crops may provide sufficient calories while still lacking important vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients. Greater crop diversity often supports more diverse and nutritious diets, contributing to improved human health. Crop diversity also supports ecological resilience. Different crops interact with soils, water, pests, pollinators, and microorganisms in different ways. Diverse farming systems can improve resource use efficiency, reduce pest outbreaks, enhance soil health, and support beneficial ecological processes that contribute to long-term sustainability. From the perspective of plant breeding, crop diversity is indispensable. The development of improved crop varieties depends upon access to diverse genetic resources. Traits such as drought tolerance, heat resistance, flood tolerance, salinity tolerance, and disease resistance are often discovered within traditional varieties or crop wild relatives. Without access to this diversity, future crop improvement would become increasingly difficult. The potato provides a useful example. Thousands of traditional potato varieties and numerous wild relatives contain genetic traits that breeders use to develop improved varieties capable of withstanding diseases, drought, heat, and other environmental stresses. Similar examples can be found across many major food crops. Crop diversity also enhances flexibility. As climate conditions evolve, farmers may need to adopt new crops, introduce different varieties, or modify production systems. Maintaining a broad portfolio of genetic resources increases the number of adaptation options available. Perhaps most importantly, diversity supports resilience without requiring us to predict every future challenge. No one can know exactly what climatic conditions, pests, diseases, or market changes agriculture will face over the coming decades. Diversity allows agricultural systems to remain adaptable even when the future is uncertain. This is one of the reasons diversity is so valuable. It provides capacity for adaptation before specific problems arise. It creates options that can be drawn upon when conditions change. As climate change accelerates and uncertainty grows, the importance of crop diversity becomes increasingly clear. Diversity is not simply a characteristic of agricultural systems. It is one of their most powerful tools for managing risk, maintaining productivity, supporting food security, and building resilience. In many ways, crop diversity represents agriculture's insurance policy for an uncertain future. The greater the diversity available within a food system, the greater its ability to adapt, recover, and continue providing food and livelihoods under changing environmental conditions. Much of what we have discussed so far has been based on ecological principles and agricultural experience. However, an important question remains. Does scientific research support the idea that crop diversity improves resilience? Research increasingly suggests that the answer is yes. One influential study conducted by researchers at Stanford University examined how crop diversity affects agricultural resilience under changing climatic conditions. The researchers analyzed global agricultural data and climate projections to understand whether more diverse agricultural systems are better able to cope with environmental variability and climate-related stress. Their findings were both significant and encouraging. The study found that greater crop diversity consistently reduced the negative impacts of climate variability on agricultural production. Across different regions and environmental conditions, agricultural systems containing a wider variety of crops generally demonstrated greater resilience than systems dominated by only a few crops. To understand why this occurs, it is helpful to consider how different crops respond to environmental stress. No two crops respond in exactly the same way to drought, heat, flooding, pest outbreaks, or changing rainfall patterns. A climate event that severely affects one crop may have a much smaller impact on another. Some crops may continue producing even when environmental conditions become unfavorable for others. Because of these differences, diversity spreads risk across multiple biological systems. When one crop experiences reduced yields, others may continue to perform relatively well, helping to stabilize overall production. This buffering effect reduces the likelihood of large-scale losses and contributes to more reliable food supplies. The Stanford researchers found that agricultural systems with greater crop diversity exhibited lower year-to-year fluctuations in production. In other words, diverse systems were not only productive but also more stable over time. Stability is an important characteristic because food security depends not merely on high yields in favorable years, but on maintaining production across a wide range of environmental conditions. One of the most important findings was that the benefits of diversity became even more apparent in regions experiencing greater climatic variability. As weather patterns became less predictable, the resilience advantages associated with crop diversity became increasingly valuable. Diverse agricultural systems were better able to absorb environmental shocks and maintain more consistent levels of production. The study also highlighted an important future challenge. Climate change is expected to increase production variability in many agricultural regions. Rising temperatures, shifting precipitation patterns, and more frequent extreme weather events are likely to create additional uncertainty for farmers and food systems. However, the researchers concluded that increasing crop diversity can partially offset these risks. Crop diversification should therefore be viewed as an important climate adaptation strategy that complements other approaches such as improved irrigation, advanced crop breeding, better resource management, and technological innovation. The benefits identified by the study extended beyond production stability alone. Diverse agricultural systems also contribute to broader ecosystem functions. They can improve resource utilization, reduce vulnerability to pests and diseases, enhance ecological stability, and strengthen the overall resilience of farming systems. These ecological benefits become increasingly important as environmental stresses intensify under climate change. Perhaps the most important message from the Stanford research is that diversity should not be viewed as a luxury or an optional feature of agricultural systems. Instead, diversity can be understood as a practical and scientifically supported strategy for managing uncertainty. In a stable environment, reliance on a small number of crops may appear efficient, but when conditions become unpredictable, efficiency alone may not be sufficient. Resilience becomes equally important, and resilience often depends upon maintaining a broad portfolio of biological resources. The study reinforces a central theme of this module. Diversity creates options. The greater the diversity within an agricultural system, the greater its capacity to absorb shocks, adapt to changing conditions, and continue functioning in the face of uncertainty. As climate change accelerates, these findings carry important implications for farmers, researchers, policymakers, and food security planners. Building resilience is no longer simply about increasing production. It is about creating agricultural systems capable of thriving under a wide range of future conditions. The Stanford study provides strong evidence that crop diversity can help achieve that goal. It demonstrates that diversity is not only a characteristic of healthy agricultural systems, but also a powerful tool for adaptation in a changing world. Farmers have always managed risk. Long before modern climate models, satellite imagery, and weather forecasting systems existed, farming communities understood a fundamental truth. Agriculture is inherently uncertain. Weather conditions change, pests appear unexpectedly, diseases spread, markets fluctuate, and environmental conditions evolve over time. Successful farmers learned that survival often depended not on predicting every challenge, but on preparing for uncertainty. One of the oldest and most effective ways of managing agricultural risk has been diversity. The concept is simple. When all resources are invested in a single crop or a single variety, the consequences of failure can be severe. If drought affects that crop, if a disease outbreak occurs, or if market prices collapse, the farmer may experience substantial losses. The entire system becomes dependent on the success of a limited number of biological and economic variables. Crop diversity reduces this vulnerability by distributing risk across multiple crops, varieties, and growing conditions. Different crops possess different characteristics. Some tolerate drought, others perform better under cooler temperatures. Some are resistant to particular diseases, others mature at different times of the year. Because these responses vary, environmental stress rarely affects every crop in exactly the same way. This principle is similar to the strategy used in financial investment. Investors rarely place all of their savings into a single stock. Instead, they diversify their investments across multiple assets to reduce exposure to any one source of risk. Agriculture can benefit from a similar approach. A diversified farming system functions like a diversified investment portfolio. If one crop performs poorly because of unfavorable weather, pest damage, or disease pressure, other crops may continue to produce. The resulting losses are often smaller than they would be in a highly specialized system. This risk-spreading effect becomes increasingly important as climate change introduces greater variability into agricultural production. Rising temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns, and more frequent extreme weather events create conditions that are often difficult to predict. Under these circumstances, diversity becomes a practical strategy for reducing uncertainty. Research supports this perspective. Studies have shown that diverse agricultural systems often experience lower production variability and greater stability over time. While yields may still fluctuate, the fluctuations tend to be less severe because losses in one component of the system can be partially offset by gains in another. Risk management through diversity can occur at several levels. At the species level, farmers may cultivate multiple crops rather than relying on a single crop. Cereals, legumes, vegetables, fruits, and other crops may be combined within the same farming system. Because these crops respond differently to environmental conditions, overall production becomes more resilient. At the varietal level, farmers may grow multiple varieties of the same crop. One variety may be better adapted to drought, another may mature earlier, while a third may offer greater resistance to disease. This approach reduces dependence on any single genetic profile. Risk management can also occur through crop rotations. By alternating crops over time, farmers can reduce pest and disease pressures, improve soil fertility, and distribute production risks across different growing seasons and environmental conditions. The concept extends beyond production alone. Diversity can also reduce economic risk. Different crops often respond differently to market conditions. When prices decline for one commodity, income from other crops may help stabilize farm revenues. This economic flexibility can be particularly valuable for smallholder farmers operating under uncertain conditions. An additional benefit of diversity is flexibility. Farmers managing diverse systems often have more options available when conditions change. They can adjust planting decisions, introduce new varieties, modify crop rotations, or respond to emerging challenges more effectively than systems built around a narrow biological base. Importantly, diversity does not eliminate risk. Agriculture will always face uncertainty. Droughts, floods, pests, diseases, and market disruptions will continue to occur. What diversity does is reduce vulnerability and improve the capacity to cope with those challenges. In many respects, crop diversity functions as a form of biological insurance. Just as insurance helps protect against unexpected losses, diversity provides a safeguard against environmental and economic uncertainty. The greater the diversity available within a farming system, the greater the number of adaptive options available when conditions become unfavorable. This idea is becoming increasingly important in the era of climate change. Future environmental conditions cannot be predicted with complete certainty. Farmers, researchers, and policymakers therefore require strategies that remain effective across a wide range of possible futures. Crop diversity is one such strategy. Rather than depending on a single solution, diversity creates multiple pathways for adaptation. It allows agricultural systems to absorb shocks, adjust to change, and continue functioning even when individual components are affected by stress. For this reason, many researchers now view crop diversity not simply as a conservation issue, but as a practical risk management tool. It helps transform uncertainty from a threat into a challenge that agricultural systems are better prepared to address. As we continue through the module, we will explore the biological foundation that makes this possible: genetic diversity. It is genetic diversity that provides the traits and characteristics enabling crops to adapt, survive, and thrive under changing environmental conditions. Sometimes, a single crop can help us understand a much larger concept. One of the most powerful examples of the value of crop diversity comes from an unlikely source: the potato. Today, potatoes are one of the world's most important food crops. Along with rice and wheat, they help feed billions of people and are cultivated across a wide range of climates and environments. Yet the potato's history also provides important lessons about vulnerability, resilience, and the critical role of genetic diversity. The potato originated thousands of years ago in the Andes Mountains of South America, particularly in regions that are now part of Peru and Bolivia. Indigenous farming communities cultivated and managed potatoes for generations, developing thousands of distinct varieties adapted to different elevations, soils, temperatures, and environmental conditions. These traditional farmers did not rely on a single potato variety. Instead, they maintained extraordinary diversity. Some varieties tolerated cold temperatures at high elevations, others resisted particular pests and diseases, some matured quickly while others stored well or performed better under specific environmental conditions. Over centuries, this diversity acted as a form of insurance. Environmental conditions could change from year to year, but the presence of many different varieties increased the likelihood that at least some would continue to produce successfully. When potatoes were introduced to Europe in the 16th century, they gradually became an important staple food. In some regions, however, cultivation became increasingly dependent on a limited number of varieties. This concentration created hidden vulnerability. The most famous example occurred during the Irish Potato Famine of the 1840s. Much of Ireland's potato production relied heavily on a small number of genetically similar potato varieties. When a destructive disease known as late blight arrived, the lack of genetic diversity left crops highly susceptible. Potato harvests failed repeatedly, leading to widespread hunger, social disruption, disease, and mass migration. The Irish Potato Famine remains one of history's most powerful reminders of the dangers associated with genetic uniformity. When diversity is limited, a single threat can have devastating consequences. Modern science has learned important lessons from this experience. Today, plant breeders recognize that crop improvement depends upon access to broad genetic diversity. Fortunately, potatoes possess a remarkable reservoir of genetic resources. Thousands of traditional potato varieties and numerous wild relatives continue to exist in South America and elsewhere. These genetic resources contain traits that may prove invaluable for future agriculture. Researchers and breeders search this diversity for characteristics such as drought tolerance, heat tolerance, disease resistance, pest resistance, flood tolerance, and the ability to grow under changing environmental conditions. As climate change accelerates, these traits are becoming increasingly important. The potato provides an excellent example of how crop diversity supports adaptation. Scientists can identify useful traits in traditional varieties or wild relatives and incorporate those traits into new varieties capable of performing under emerging climatic conditions. Without access to this genetic diversity, many of these improvements would not be possible. However, the potato story teaches another important lesson. Climate adaptation is highly crop-specific. Traits that help potatoes tolerate drought or resist disease cannot automatically be transferred to crops such as rice, wheat, maize, sorghum, or cassava. Each crop possesses its own unique genetic characteristics, biological processes, and environmental requirements. As a result, every major crop requires its own reservoir of genetic diversity to support future adaptation. This is why conserving crop diversity across many species is so important. Agriculture cannot rely on a handful of improved varieties and assume future challenges have been solved. New environmental pressures will continue to emerge, and different crops will require different solutions. The potato story therefore illustrates both the risks of losing diversity and the opportunities created by preserving it. When diversity disappears, agricultural systems become more vulnerable. When diversity is conserved, it provides options for adaptation, innovation, and resilience. In many ways, the thousands of potato varieties maintained by farmers and conserved in gene banks represent a living library of solutions accumulated over centuries of evolution and human selection. Each variety may contain genetic traits that could become valuable under future climatic conditions. The broader lesson extends far beyond potatoes. Whether we are discussing rice, wheat, maize, beans, millet, sorghum, cassava, or countless other crops, the principle remains the same. Diversity provides the raw material for adaptation. As climate change continues to reshape agriculture, the ability to draw upon this genetic wealth may become one of the most important factors determining the resilience of future food systems. The story of the potato reminds us that crop diversity is not merely a scientific concept, it is a practical resource that can help societies manage risk, respond to change, and build a more secure agricultural future. Throughout this module, we have seen that crop diversity provides resilience, supports adaptation, and helps reduce risk. An equally important question is this: what happens when diversity is lost? The answer is simple but profound. When diversity is lost, options are lost. Every crop variety contains a unique combination of genetic traits. Some traits are immediately visible, such as plant height, grain size, color, or maturity period. Others remain hidden until they are needed. A seemingly unremarkable variety may possess resistance to a disease that has not yet emerged, tolerance to a climate condition that has not yet become widespread, or the ability to survive environmental stresses that future generations may encounter. Once a variety disappears, those genetic traits may disappear with it. This process is often referred to as genetic erosion. Genetic erosion occurs when traditional crop varieties, land races, and other genetic resources are replaced by a smaller number of uniform varieties, resulting in a decline in overall genetic diversity. Scientists have expressed concern about this trend for more than a century because it reduces agriculture's capacity to adapt to future challenges. The causes of genetic erosion are varied. Modern agriculture has achieved remarkable increases in productivity through improved varieties, mechanization, irrigation, fertilizers, and global markets. However, these advances have often encouraged the widespread adoption of a limited number of high-performing crop varieties. As these varieties become dominant, many traditional varieties may gradually disappear from cultivation. Urbanization, changing consumer preferences, land use change, environmental degradation, and the loss of traditional agricultural knowledge can further accelerate the decline of crop diversity. At first glance, this may not seem problematic. If newer varieties produce higher yields, why should society be concerned about older varieties that are no longer widely cultivated? The answer lies in uncertainty. Agriculture is constantly confronted by new challenges. Pests evolve, diseases mutate, climate conditions shift, water availability changes, soil conditions deteriorate, market demands fluctuate. The traits needed to address future challenges may not be present in today's most widely cultivated varieties. This is where genetic diversity becomes invaluable. Traditional varieties and crop wild relatives often contain characteristics that have been developed over centuries or even millennia of natural and human selection. Some possess tolerance to drought. Others survive flooding, salinity, extreme temperatures, or nutrient-poor soils. Still others contain resistance to diseases and pests that may become more significant in the future. These traits represent options for adaptation. Plant breeders frequently rely on such genetic resources when developing improved crop varieties. Many of the disease-resistant and climate-resilient crops used today owe their existence to genes discovered in traditional varieties or wild relatives. Without access to these genetic resources, the development of future crop varieties would become far more difficult. A useful analogy is to think of crop diversity as a toolbox. Each variety contributes a different tool. Some tools may be used frequently, others may remain unused for years. But when a new challenge arises, having access to a wide range of tools greatly increases the likelihood of finding an effective solution. Removing diversity is like removing tools from that toolbox. The fewer tools available, the fewer options exist for responding to future problems. Climate change makes this issue particularly important. Future environmental conditions are unlikely to mirror those of the past. Rising temperatures, altered rainfall patterns, increasing climate variability, and more frequent extreme weather events will create new selection pressures on agricultural systems. The crops that perform well today may not necessarily perform well under future conditions. Because we cannot predict every future challenge, maintaining diversity becomes a strategy for preserving flexibility. This principle applies not only to individual farms, but also to national and global food systems. The broader the pool of available genetic resources, the greater the ability of researchers, farmers, and policymakers to respond to emerging threats and opportunities. This understanding has led to growing international efforts to conserve crop diversity. Gene banks, seed banks, research institutions, botanical gardens, and farming communities around the world are working to preserve genetic resources before they disappear. These collections serve as repositories of biological knowledge and adaptive potential that future generations may depend upon. Ultimately, the value of crop diversity lies not only in what it provides today, but also in what it may provide tomorrow. Every traditional variety preserved, every seed conserved, and every wild relative protected represents a potential solution to a challenge that has not yet emerged. In a world characterized by uncertainty, options matter. And in agriculture, diversity is what creates those options. This recognition leads us directly to the next topic in our journey: genetic diversity as nature's adaptation mechanism. To understand why diversity creates options, we must understand how genetic variation enables crops to adapt, evolve, and respond to changing environmental conditions. Given the many benefits associated with crop diversity, an important question naturally arises. If diversification improves resilience, supports sustainability, and helps manage risk, why has its adoption been relatively slow in many parts of the world? The answer lies in the complex economic, technological, institutional, and policy forces that have shaped modern agriculture over the past century. To understand this issue, we must first recognize that farmers operate within economic systems as well as ecological systems. While diversity may provide long-term resilience benefits, farmers must also consider short-term profitability, market access, labor requirements, infrastructure, financing, and consumer demand. In many regions, agricultural development has focused on maximizing production of a relatively small number of crops. During the Green Revolution and subsequent decades, significant investments were made in improving major staple crops such as rice, wheat, and maize. High-yielding varieties, irrigation systems, fertilizers, mechanization, and improved management practices dramatically increased food production and helped feed a rapidly growing global population. These achievements were substantial and should not be underestimated. However, the success of these systems also encouraged specialization. Farmers often achieved higher short-term returns by concentrating on a limited number of crops rather than maintaining diverse production systems. Markets, supply chains, processing facilities, storage infrastructure, and agricultural support services gradually evolved around these dominant crops. As a result, economic incentives frequently favored specialization over diversification. Government policies sometimes reinforce this trend. Subsidies, price supports, crop insurance programs, research investments, and extension services often focused on a relatively small number of major commodities. Farmers responding to these incentives naturally concentrated their efforts on crops that offered reliable markets and predictable income streams. Global trade has also contributed to specialization. International markets often reward large-scale production of standardized commodities. Farmers seeking to participate in these markets may find it easier to focus on a limited number of crops that meet established quality specifications and supply chain requirements. Technological developments have played a role as well. Modern agricultural machinery is frequently designed for large-scale production of specific crops. Planting equipment, harvesting machinery, irrigation systems, storage facilities, and processing infrastructure often become more efficient when used within specialized production systems. Diversification may require additional equipment, knowledge, management skills, and labor, increasing operational complexity. Another factor is perception. For many years, a common assumption was that monocultures, large areas devoted to a single crop, were inherently more productive than diversified systems. Although research increasingly challenges this assumption, the belief has remained influential in agricultural planning and policy discussions. As a result, diversification was sometimes viewed as less efficient or less economically attractive than specialized production systems. The rapid development of biotechnology and plant breeding has also shaped thinking. Advances in genetics have created improved crop varieties capable of delivering high yields under specific conditions. In some cases, these technological solutions were viewed as alternatives to diversification rather than complementary strategies. Yet researchers increasingly recognize that improved genetics and crop diversity work best together rather than in competition. Knowledge and information barriers can further slow adoption. Diversified farming systems are often more complex to manage than highly specialized systems. Farmers may require additional knowledge about crop interactions, rotations, soil management, pest control, and market opportunities. Where extension services and technical support are limited, adopting diversification strategies can appear risky. Short-term and long-term perspectives can also differ. The benefits of diversification often accumulate over time through improved soil health, reduced pest pressures, enhanced resilience, and greater production stability. However, farmers facing immediate economic pressures may prioritize short-term income and cash flow over benefits that emerge gradually. Climate change is beginning to alter this calculation. As environmental variability increases and extreme weather events become more common, many farmers are recognizing that resilience has economic value. Stability and risk reduction are becoming increasingly important alongside productivity. The question is no longer simply how much food can be produced in an ideal year. The question is how consistently food can be produced under increasingly uncertain conditions. This shift in perspective is driving renewed interest in crop diversification around the world. Researchers, governments, development organizations, and farming communities are exploring ways to combine productivity with resilience using diversification as part of broader climate adaptation strategies. Importantly, diversification does not require abandoning modern agriculture. Rather, it involves integrating greater biological diversity into agricultural systems in ways that improve resilience while maintaining economic viability. Different regions may adopt different approaches, including crop rotations, intercropping, agroforestry systems, varietal diversification, or the introduction of new climate-resilient crops. The growing scientific evidence suggests that diversification is not a step backward. It is an evolution toward agricultural systems that are better equipped to operate under future climatic conditions. As we move to the next section, we will explore the biological foundation that makes diversification so valuable: genetic diversity. Understanding genetic diversity helps explain why some crops can adapt to drought, resist disease, tolerate heat, and survive environmental stress while others cannot. Question 1. Which of the following represents diversity within a crop species? A. Rice, wheat, and maize. B. Thousands of rice varieties adapted to different environments. C. Crops and livestock together. D. Forests and wetlands. Correct answer, B. Thousands of rice varieties adapted to different environments. Diversity within a crop species provides valuable adaptive traits such as drought tolerance, flood tolerance, and disease resistance. Question 2. What are landraces? A. Modern hybrid crops. B. Laboratory-developed crops. C. Locally adapted varieties developed by farmers over generations. D. Wild plant species unrelated to crops. Correct answer, C. Landraces are locally adapted crop varieties developed by farmers through long-term selection under local conditions. Question 3. Why are crop wild relatives important? A. They increase fertilizer use. B. They provide valuable genetic traits for crop improvement. C. They replace cultivated crops. D. They eliminate climate risks. Correct answer. B. Crop wild relatives often contain drought tolerance, heat resistance, salinity tolerance, and disease resistance traits used in plant breeding. Consider the crops commonly grown in your region. How many different crop species and varieties can you identify? Would greater diversity increase resilience to climate uncertainty? A farming district relies almost entirely on one high-yield crop variety. A new disease emerges and spreads rapidly. Yields collapse across the region. What factors made the system vulnerable? The system depended on a narrow genetic base. Limited crop and varietal diversity reduced resistance options. Greater diversity could have slowed disease spread and improved resilience. Crop diversity exists at multiple levels, including species, varieties, land races, and crop wild relatives. Diversity provides adaptation options. Genetic resources are strategic assets for climate resilience. In the next lesson, we will examine diversity as nature's adaptation mechanism.